Buddy. Hello, hello. Welcome back to Tuesday training for practitioners. Here we're going in for another great day of training. Today, we're going to talk about prime movers in joint actions. This is the last of our talk on applied functional anatomy, our 8 principles of applied functional anatomy, which we have been workshopping out for a few weeks, several weeks actually. We dove into joint actions last week and the week before, and a little bit into the muscles that move them. And what I want to talk to you guys about today is not only how we ID the joint actions and the muscles that do those movements, but what happens when compensatory patterns start. And the reason it's important for us to talk about compensatory patterns of joint actions is because that's where the symptoms are. That's where the pain is. That's usually what we're either facing as practitioners or resolving as clinicians. And that's also where you guys ask me the most questions. So we're going to dive in there today. And I'm going to share all of those features with you today as we join in. I'm also going to talk to you about symptoms and what they actually are. If you are joining me here live today, please let me know that. I'm just pulling up the chat on our live stream. So please do feel free to let me know that you're here, and also use the chat to ask questions. So I will answer them live for you while we're here. And please do feel free to do that, right? This is your Q&A time as well as our training time together. So please feel free to ask any questions if you have them. I will happily answer them for you. If you are joining me for the first time, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm your host for the hour, Gina Schatz. I am going to answer for you and feed you today with all kinds of applicable and usable information relative to functional anatomy that I use and have used clinically for 33 years, going on 33 years now in March. I can't believe it's been that long, but it's just been so much fun. And I love the work that I do. I know you love the work that you do, and I want to make it easier for you. So that's my purpose for being here and why we're here today and every Tuesday. If you're here for the millionth time, also super glad to see that you're here. Please do let me know that. I do love to know who's here because it helps me know what questions you might have. And also it would do me a lot of good to know if you are a manual or a movement practitioner. I typically don't need to know if you're a manual or movement practitioner, because the way I approach anatomy and functional anatomy is that we're all using the same anatomy. And so that's really where I like to focus for us, the overlap between what manual practitioners need to know and what movement practitioners need to know. That's the same and often overlooked. And I mean overlooked with the greatest amount of respect. Manual practitioners have in their history of training, and I know because I am one, overlooked the function and the movement related to the anatomy that they're treating because we don't learn movement. That's not what we're up to. I don't think that we need to become movement practitioners, but we need to know the function of the anatomy that we're addressing. So that's the movement part of it. And also not only how it moves, but how to identify when the way it's designed to move is not happening, because that's usually when we're faced with pain and chief complaints, etc. So that is the anatomy that I think is the focal point shared among movement and manual practitioners. And the reason why movement practitioners, I believe, get to have this overlap as well is because they tend to have less detail on the anatomy and the design of the anatomy. Doesn't mean that you guys don't know anatomy. It just means that there's this place in the middle where when I talk to manual or movement practitioners, there seems to be this like shared, central pool of information, if you will, that I'm answering to both manual and movement practitioners alike. So I don't need to know if you're a manual or movement practitioner. I would just like to know. So if you want to share with me in the comment section, if you're here as a manual or movement practitioner, that would also light me up to know who's here watching and joining in today. And I am still looking for our video. We are streaming, so I know that we're here. I hope you guys are here, and I will find you in a second. Okay, so Gary's a manual practitioner. I love it. Fantastic. And I know, Gary, you've been with us for the last few weeks that we've been going through applied functional anatomy. Here we go. I'm into the chat now. Awesome. Okay, I see you guys are here. I love it. So glad you guys are here. Please let me know if you have any questions as we move through, and I will absolutely pause what I'm saying if needed and answer it for you. So what we're diving into specifically today is a continuation, as I said, of our 8 functional anatomy principles, and that is part of a larger course. Now, I put these 8 principles together because I recognized that I kept referring back to these same ideas about the body's design when I was working clinically as a manual practitioner. So again, as a manual practitioner, I needed to know how things were built, designed, and also how they were built and designed to move. It's when we're not using our body the way it's designed, or when we're not moving our body the way it's designed, that equals pain and symptoms. So I needed to know this. And so as I started referring back to these same 8 principles over and over and over again, I realized, hey, I'm onto something. I have these 8 same ideas that I keep going back to. And so I'm sharing them with you. So that's what we've been doing for the last several weeks, just parts of each of those principles. We're going to continue on with those today. And again, we have all of these principles compiled in a course, Applied Functional Anatomy, the 8 principles of Applied Functional Anatomy, and it's currently running in our club. So if you are a club member, you have access to the entire course. We go over every one of the 8 principles and we workshop them out. And while we're in the club, we have study groups and I'm in there coaching and training as well. So if this appeals to you, and you're like, yeah, I really need to know this because I see how it could relate to the work that I'm doing, then please come join us and just get the whole kit and caboodle. This is the perfect week to join, by the way, because the course is available through the end of the month for all club members. So please do join us there. And we're going to dive in a little bit more here too. So when we have clients or students or patients, I call them clients as a general term. When we have folks that we're serving that come to us and they have pain or any other discrepancy, those all, the discrepancies, the dysfunction, the pain, those all fall under symptoms. Sometimes we mistakenly think that symptoms are only pain. And I hear this often from movement practitioners that the folks that they're serving aren't necessarily in pain. They're just not able to do the movement that's being requested of them. Well, that's still a symptom though. And the manual practitioners, those of us who are manual therapists, we tend to find folks who come in with the pain and I can't move. And so then we forget that we need to restore them back to being able to move without the pain. All of those fall under categories that I would describe as symptoms. It doesn't have to be pain, but it could be. It doesn't have to be dysfunction, like something's wrong or broken or there's a pathology, although it could. It could also be just non-functioning. They're not able to do the work. They're not able to do the movement or not able to do it without pain or sensation, but they don't have to have pain or sensation to not be using something well. That falls under recruitment and compensation patterns as well. And so sometimes, again, we think if there's not pain, there's not a symptom. Not being able to move our body the way it's designed is a symptom of something, of function. It's like a symptom of function, not functioning. Recruitment, if you recognize it when you're doing movement, even if it's assisted or passive movement, there still can be recruitment present. That's also a symptom that it's not functioning, moving the way it's designed to. And if we don't address recruitment and compensatory patterns that are non-pain presenting, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can guarantee you it will equal pain soon enough. The reason why we get to pain, meaning we reach it, is not because there's something wrong with the body. It's that the compensatory and recruitment pattern or the dysfunction or the non-function is only available for a window of time. It's not a math equation. I can't tell you what the window is, but the reason I know that it's a window, a specific window and not an eternity, is because of how we're designed. The way we're designed is the way we're designed. The way we're designed is flawless. The way we're designed equals movement without pain. The way we're designed equals full function without pain. So when we are in an area of non-movement, dysfunction, non-function, it will equal pain because that's not being, we're not using our design the way it's designed to move. So that's how that all works. And we don't have to have pain to know that we need to intervene. Again, for both manual and movement practitioners. I saw a few more of you jumped on since we've been here. Hello. Let me know that you're here. I would love to know that you're here. And if you want to let me know if you're a manual or movement practitioner, I can speak to you directly. So I would love to do that. So I'm going to walk you through today some of those compensatory and recruitment patterns that we might not see at first, and how important they are, because that's when clinically folks show up for me as a manual practitioner and also as a movement practitioner, which I also am, how they stop coming to the movement part of what I do because they have a dysfunction or they have pain that prevents them from doing the moving. So whether you're a manual or movement practitioner, this information again today is going to serve you. Okay, that's my intention anyway. All right, as we get started here, I want to also acknowledge each of you for being here. And if you stay until the end, of course, we have our Pin It to Win It game. So our Pin It to Win It is right down here in the corner of the screen. I will, at random intervals throughout our training today, I will pin a letter. And we'll keep pinning the letters until the end of our training. And so as an award or acknowledgement, a gratitude and a celebration for you for today's training and for all of our training here on Tuesday, as you collect those letters and you stay until the end, just type the word that those letters spell out into the comment section below this video. And I will send you an extra training, because that means you're here for it and you're filling yourself up with all the goodness. And so I want you to have more of what you came here for. So that's a thank you from me for watching till the end, and also an acknowledgement and celebration for you. Okay, so let's get into it today. We talked in the last few weeks on joint actions. I threw up some slides. We observed some positions and postures in real time. We identified what the joint actions were, what the joint actions weren't, and at times, we were also able to identify the muscles that do those joint actions. First joint action that we went over, let me just grab our assistant here, our handy assistant Murph, who likes to throw his limbs around, but that's okay. He's still doing a great job. The first joint action that we reviewed together was in the hips. Hip joint is here. So the movement happens in this ball and socket joint. And the first joint action that we identified was hip flexion. Okay. Gary, do you want to be hot seated today? Do you want me to call you out on your memory recall? All right. What's the main muscle? What's the main agonist muscle that does the function, the joint action of hip flexion?
Psoas.
Yes, exactly. Psoas is the prime mover of hip flexion. He's the strongest hip flexor in the body. And as we know through reciprocal inhibition, he does not work alone. He doesn't work alone to even do the hip flexion. He's just the guy who does most of it. So as we're looking through our muscle ID and what do we need to address for a client or a student who can't do hip flexion or can't do it without pain, we want to go to the main guy first, because that's where we're going to cover the most territory. So the main guy meaning muscle, the main guy for hip flexion is the psoas. And he's got helper bees that help him do that job. Those helper bees are identified as synergists, synergistic muscles to the action. Synergists help the agonist do the joint action. If I'm talking Latin to you right now, and I am, but it sounds like Latin instead of landing as clarity, please, please, please get yourself deep into reciprocal inhibition so that you know how these muscles all work in concert. Why do I want you to know that? Because if we don't know the muscles that help out the main guy, we won't be able to identify a recruitment or a compensatory pattern. We won't even know that it's happening. We won't be able to I spy it. First, we need to know the joint action anatomy principle. Then we need to know the muscle that does that joint action. In this case, it's psoas for hip flexion. And then we need to know the concert of muscles that works together, because it's usually in that concert of muscles that the first layer of compensatory or recruitment action begins. It would make sense because it's targeted around the joint that's doing the action, or the joint's not doing the action. I hope you guys caught that. It's the muscles that do the joint action. And it's usually in that concert of muscles of reciprocal inhibition where you want to look first. It also is the fastest path to equal fatigue and then pain? Because a synergist muscle, a helper bee, is not designed to do the whole job. So if the main guy's not doing his job, in this case, if psoas is not doing most of the heavy lifting for hip flexion, and he's supposed to, then the helper bees who are around him that assist him in doing hip flexion will have to do more of the heavy lifting. Well, they're not designed to do most, they're designed to do some. So that equals fatigue right away. And not like workout fatigue, like, oh, muscle fatigue. I worked that muscle to fatigue. I've got the most gains. Actually, it's the opposite. You fatigue too quickly and don't get enough gains if the main muscle's not doing the job, and the synergists get taxed too soon. So we want to know that. We want to know that as movement providers. We also want to know that as manual providers, because when we're starting to look at dysfunction and pain patterns, we need to be able to ID, is the main guy doing his job? Or was it a group of synergists that jumped in, and that's why there's fatigue and ache and symptoms in this area of the body? Okay. On the other side of the lever, what we want to know then is, if psoas is the main guy doing hip flexion, who's the main guy who's allowing it to happen on the other side of the lever? Who's the main guy who's lengthening? And lengthening is the key here. It's not stretching, because we know from another anatomy principle, stretching doesn't exist. And we talked about that not only in the course, but we've talked about it here in Tuesday training. So what muscle, Gary, I'll hot seat you again. What muscle needs to lengthen in order for hip flexion to occur? Psoas does the contracting, his synergists help him out, and then there's a guy on the other side of the lever that's got to lengthen to allow the joint to move in this direction. Who's that? Say it. You're unmuted, Gary. I love that you're willing to be hot seated, brave man. I love it. Well done.
That's how you learn.
It is how you learn. Exactly. Good job.
The glute max.
Glute max lengthens for sure. The
Mhm.
reason we know that he's the main lengthening muscle on the other side of the lever is the same way that we identify the agonist. So the agonist on one side of the lever, the muscle that's doing the contracting, the muscle that's doing the action in this joint action, is psoas. We've identified that. If we were to do the opposite joint action, the opposing action on the lever, that would be hyperextension of the hip, and the main guy who does that is glute max. If it's the main guy who does the opposing joint action, he is the main one who's lengthening then to oppose the joint action than what he does, which would be the same as the main guy who's lengthening to do hyperextension of the hip is also psoas, because he's the main guy who does flexion of the hip. Okay. And just as we talked about in reciprocal inhibition, there's also helper bees. So we know that not only does glute max do hyperextension of the hip, so do hamstrings. And so we know that they're working in concert together, which means they're also lengthening in concert. But they're not lengthening as an action. They're lengthening in response to the action. So stretching is not an action. It's a response to an action. It's another principle of anatomy. Now, I know that right now I've already laid it out kind of boom, 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 fast. And if you're joining us on this content for the first time, that might feel like a lot. It's okay. It is. And it's also completely outlined for us. So again, we outline it together week after week here in Tuesday training, and it's all part of this course that we're working together through in the club together. Okay, so why does this matter now? Well, if I have any resistance or inhibition in the action of psoas, meaning he can't do the main job of hip flexion, it will make it difficult not only for me to do hip flexion, but also for me to do hyperextension of the hip, because we know that the lever has to be balanced. The guys that do the action on one side have to be equally strong as the guys on the other side who do the action. And the guys that lengthen on both sides have to be equally willing to do the lengthening to allow the contracting to occur. That's the main function and design of a lever system. So if we're still learning that, understandably, it would be difficult for us then to pinpoint a muscle that's the problem. What tends to happen for manual practitioners is they will pinpoint a muscle that they can get the most response out of. But that's just a symptom. That's not necessarily the cause. So symptoms, as we laid out, is pain and dysfunction and non-function and recruiting. And 90% of the pain, by the time it gets to that, 90% of the pain in the body is referred from somewhere else. So we could get a lot of response from a muscle. Wow, I'm really palpating that psoas. There was a video that I just saw that came out on one of the groups that I'm in, where they actually showed on cadaver studies, you actually can palpate part of the psoas. He does respond to you palpating. You manual practitioners are so excited about that. Me too. And do I need to palpate him? The only way to know that is by knowing what is supposed to be happening by movement design in this joint, and then identify the muscles that do it and whether they're actually doing their job. Otherwise, I'm just probing on muscles and getting responses out of them, and it might not be the muscle that's the cause of the issue. Okay, so let's take it to another level here. For example, if I was to know that hip flexion happens from main action of psoas, and I also know that the hamstrings have to lengthen because they help out glute max doing hyperextension of the hip, which means they're doing the opposite right now. They're lengthening, at least upper fibers are. If I know that hamstrings have to lengthen in order for me to have enough strength in psoas to do the joint action, both are true. Psoas has to be strong enough to do the hip flexion, and glute max and hamstrings must allow it equally. That's the balance of the lever. If instead, though, I have inhibition happening in hamstrings, they may not have enough elasticity to allow the flexion of the hip to occur, which is done by psoas. So I could then be blaming psoas for something that's actually being caused by hamstrings. Well, now I've spent all my time palpating psoas, releasing psoas, doing all this main psoas work, which will always get a response on the person that you're palpating, always. But I haven't really fixed the problem if the cause is from hamstrings, not lengthening. So then what we want to do then is find out, well, why aren't they lengthening? Why aren't they lengthening? Why wouldn't hamstrings lengthen? What would be their holdup? The answer I hear a lot is, well, they're tight. Yeah, but they didn't come tight. So what made them tight? What made them tight? And I request that all of us, manual and movement practitioners alike, find out what made them tight. That's often alignment or another pattern in an adjacent reciprocal inhibition concert. And that we could dive down specifically through client work, case by case by case. But you want to know that so that we don't get too tunnel visioned and we miss the whole forest. And we also don't want to be too burdened by the whole forest that we can't see a tree. So we want to learn then the design so that we can start identifying, well, it's designed this way and it's moving that way. And this is the guy that does it. And wow, he's not. Wow, look at that. Okay, he's not doing the job. He's not doing the job of joint action. We need to be able to walk through these principles succinctly without getting too distracted by all the trees in the forest. And again, that's how I came up with these principles so that I could follow my own line and reverse engineer what I was working on and not get too distracted by 600 muscle choices. Okay, so that's idea number one. Then we have other considerations. I want to walk us through another one. We worked through lateral rotation of the hip. Let me know in the comment section, guys, those of you who are here live with us on YouTube, and if you're watching on the replay, let me know if this is landing for you, if you had a takeaway, an aha, or if you need me to offer more clarity, which I'm happy to do. And let me just pause here for a second. I just had a conversation with my advanced level practitioners this week, and we talked about humbleness and confidence. And this is not to be pointed in any direction. It's literally my heart is so open to you guys on this. Let me just get this whole conversation context out. I'm still deciding. I'm still learning, not deciding. I'm still learning from all of you beautiful souls who join me every week for training. I'm still learning what it is that is in the gap for you because I'm determined to fill that gap. That's the only reason I'm here every week over and over and over again. We've been here for a couple years. I will be here probably to the end of my days. I want to fill in the gaps for you. And in order for me to do that, I need to know what the gaps are. So we had this conversation about like, well, how do I find out what's in the gap for you? Like what actually is happening? And there's something in collectively, no, not pointed at any one of us, but collectively in our industry, there's something here about, well, I took the training, so I should know. Or I've been a practitioner for X number of years, so I should know. Or I have seen so many people and I didn't answer it for them, and now I'm unhappy about how I didn't answer it for them. Gary, you unmuted. Do you want to add to this conversation? Is something coming up for you?
Yeah, I think the humbleness gets back to knowing what you don't know.
Mhm.
And that's then you know where to go with it. Otherwise, you kind of stir in your own emotional soup on it. And attending these kinds of workshops helps you get yourself out of that soup. I mean, I'm thinking, um, I'm thinking, okay, on the hip flexion, it may be the psoas, but I'm not really clear on all the synergistics muscles that go into that. So now I'm thinking, okay, now I have to get this information.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's just my comment about, the expectation that we're going to solve problems. But if I mean, I go back to, wow, if I had only known this 25 years ago when I went to school, why aren't they teaching this stuff? Yeah, but I mean, that's not the point. The point is the emotional piece of it is just humble yourself and go to a class.
Mhm.
That's going to
Right.
help you, understand what you don't know and then go from there.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for adding that. I
Mm.
appreciate you being, open and sharing with all of us as we learn together. And I do appreciate that you said, come here because that is absolutely what I'm up to. I want us to feel comfortable and safe coming here to learn more and not intimidated that we don't. There's a reason why the schools don't teach it, and also a reason why they insist that we have continuing education. There's only so much they can teach us in a period of time. I feel the same way. There's only so much I can share with you in an hour or a year, right? Like, or a 16-hour course. There's only so much. You got to bookend it somewhere. So they teach what they teach, and I'm here to fill in the gaps. Not because they didn't teach us something that was valuable. There's just more for us to learn. And there's always going to be more for us to learn. I'm still learning. I'm still learning. So I told you I just watched a cadaver study video, right? Because I don't do cadaver studies. I need to get my head around that. I need to learn it as I go. So I really appreciate the commitment, Gary, and the openness to continuing to come back to learn. And I want us to create that collectively so that it's contagious. If we stay intimidated or insistent that we're supposed to know, we will continue to be disgruntled and disheartened every step of the way. But if instead we assume that we're not going to know and stay open to what can I learn next and curious about what else don't I know, then we continue on the path of learning and excellence, and we stop looking in the rearview mirror and blaming the last training that didn't give us all the answers. There isn't one. There just isn't. It's not possible. Even in my longer program, there's still anatomy that needs to be learned to be able to implement some of these things, right? You have more, Gary? Go ahead.
Yeah, the word implementation is the key piece of that. You
Mhm.
got to take it off the paper and put it onto the table.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that I think that's a challenge when we're doing workshopping. That gives me more of a kineset, a kinesthetic concept of how this feels, how this is moving.
Yeah.
If I don't work on a body right now when we're workshopping, I've got to feel it in my own body.
Hmm.
Then it really comes together uh, in a very strong way. So
Hmm.
yeah,
So good.
use it
Yep.
or lose it.
Absolutely. You're speaking the gospel, man. I love when you're like, I know I've said that so many times, and to hear you say it back with such assurance, I'm like, yes, see, that
Mhm.
works. We got to workshop it out. And I would add one more step to that. Yes, we need to use it on our own body, but in that same openness and, humility, we then need to be able to go work on a body outside of us because it's different, right?
Yeah.
And still be open to I might not get it right the first time. Not every pitch is a home run. So then what do you do? Well, what I've experienced is sometimes practitioners will come from a workshop, they'll have their own body. Even when I teach live and in person, they work on each other, but then they go work on a client and it's not a colleague
Mhm.
and it's a whole different ball of wax. And
Yeah.
then they get sort of flustered. And so I really believe in the power of community, which is another reason why we have our club and we have our, expanding community. You got to be able to feel comfortable enough and confident enough to come back to a group of peers who are going to answer your question for you. And if we don't allow ourselves to humbly come back and say, hey, I did this in the workshop and it was awesome. My notes are clear as day. But when I got into the clinical setting with this client, what the freak to do? What do you guys see? And so that's one of the reasons we have our challenges in the club and we post pictures and talk it all out because some other people are going to see other things and help us remember how to synthesize all the details and put it together. And I really feel like that's a place of necessity. And I've seen some practitioners who think, and this came up in our conversation when I had with our advocates this week, that every graduation, every course completion, every earned CE certificate is a celebration and it can also be a false sense of security. Those are words literally from one of our advocates. And I was like, oh, that's such a great, like, yeah, I feel that. Like, I took this course, I took this program, I finished this CE, I got an A, therefore I must know. And you might actually know, and there's still more. So what happens then when the thing that you got an A on, you went out into the clinical space and it didn't work, it didn't hash out the way it did in the workshop? Are we going to blame the workshop? No, we're going to keep going. We're going to be open enough to know that we're in community and I did take good notes and I did get an A on that quiz and I still would like some support here. And so I really love the feeling of our community because we create that. And I think that's the way to learn. I think it's the only way to learn. We're never going to learn. We're interdependent by design. We're not going to learn in a bubble by ourselves. It just doesn't work. Okay. Thanks for supporting the mission on that one, Gary. I appreciate the interlude as we're moving through here, joint actions. Okay, let's walk through another joint action. And as we're changing our focal point, let's add another letter to pin it to win it. Okay. So here we are, the next joint action that we went through 2 weeks ago, and I'm just referring back to that so you guys can, who are here in Tuesday training, you can go back through and watch Tuesday training from 2 weeks ago. We did lateral rotation of the hip. So that's here at this joint, lateral rotation. It's here at this joint. We talked about how we use the knees, we use the feet, we use the ankles, and it's not happening in the knees and the ankles. The closest it would be is half of the knee, which is made up of half, half of it's made up of the femur, but that's it. So hip rotations, lateral rotations happening here. Medial rotation is another rotation available in the hip joint. Okay, so in order for us to do lateral rotation of the hip, what is the main guy who does that? You want to be hot seated again, Gary? What's the main guy who does lateral rotation of the hip?
Glute med or glute min. I'm not sure which. Maybe it was a combination because one does both. I think it's glute med.
Okay, you're thinking of medial rotation.
Oh, okay.
Okay, what you want to try lateral rotation?
Lateral rotation. Hmm. Mm, some of the deep six, but maybe not. That's the guess.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we workshop this out actually in our 8 principles course. And I know you're in our club, Gary, so you have access to that course. I hope you're moving along in that course. The deep six are the lateral hip rotators. Piriformis is the main guy who does lateral hip rotation. And again, it's in the 8 principles course. So dive in there, Gary, because we have a week left in that course inside the club to be, have access to all that workshopping. So please do that. Because I want you to have it. And also, Gary, I acknowledge you because you've really come a long way. You confessed openly on camera not too long ago that you were still learning joint actions. Now you got joint actions and you're on prime movers. I'm like super proud of you. So celebrating you.
Got it. Thank you. But you got to show up.
You got to show up to get the training. Exactly. And you are showing up. So I acknowledge you. And what a great role model you are, right? Like you're inspiring the rest of us. So well done and way to show them how to win. I love it. Okay, so lateral rotation of the hip is a function prime mover piriformis, and the go-go queens, the rest of the deep six, are the synergists, those reciprocal inhibition muscles that work in concert with the agonist. Again, if that sounded like Latin, please go get the training because it matters. It matters as we're just about to work through one of the compensatory issues. Okay, so if I have lateral rotation of the hip happening by piriformis in the deep six, the medial rotators of the hip, which you called out, Gary, glute med and glute min, medius and minimus, they have to then lengthen in order for deep six to be able to contract. Now, if we start looking through habits, functional patterning, functional patterns are real and they're needed in the body. We have a pattern of how we do something. That's by design of reciprocal inhibition, the lever system and reciprocal inhibition, mostly reciprocal inhibition. These parts all do this, those parts all do that, and these parts all make this happen. That's the design. But our body will do anything that we ask it to do, even if one of those muscles in the design is on a little vacation. And muscles don't go on vacation. They go on vacation when they're upset, and they go on vacation when they're injured. So we don't want them to be on vacation. We want them to all be participating. If I have a functional pattern, that is how I'm designed, but there can also be created patterns. So a pattern in the body, a functional pattern in the body, is something that we can create by repetition and length of time. So consistency and length of time, repetition. We can create any neural pathway and then really hone it in if we continue and continue and continue it. So just because I can do something, because the body will do anything you ask it to do, just because I can do something doesn't mean I should. Yeah. And so that's where we start falling into compensatory patterns and recruitment patterns. And they're different. There's some similarities between them and they're different. Don't worry too much about the distinctions of them today. Just know that it's part of our conversation. It's a pattern that is not by design. It's a pattern that I created, right? A recruitment pattern and a compensatory pattern is one I created. It's not a design that I came with. So when we're working with lifestyle patterns that create new patterns, and we're thinking about lateral and medial rotation of the hip, in order for me to have medial rotation and lateral rotation, both sides of that lever have to be equal in strength and equal in length. We know that. We just talked about it with hip flexion and extension. Ooh, I almost threw Murph. He would have been super mad. I need to have equal contraction here and length here, and then reversing that joint action, equal contraction here and length here. Same thing goes for every lever. in order for me to have lateral rotation and medial rotation, both joint actions must have equal power and strength and equal ability of length. Has to happen. But we know, based on glute med and min, and you started to refer to this, Gary, that oftentimes glute med and glute min are not strong because they have other jobs that they do. And those jobs are not engaged well through patterning. So if glute med is often not strong enough on this side of the lever, that means that the lateral rotation, this side of the lever, can be overdone. The other way that this lateral and medial rotation is often distorted and creates problems, symptoms with pain, not with pain, is a chosen pattern. If I stand with my joint in neutral, my hip joint in neutral, there is no medial or lateral rotation happening. But if I stand with lateral rotation, which looks like toes out, again, it's not happening in the toes, it's happening here, and you can workshop that in your own body. You can hold on to this hip joint right here, standing, hold on to it, turn your toes out into first position, and you'll feel the femur rolling in that joint. You feeling it, Gary? Great. And you're even sitting. So standing, you definitely get it, right? You can feel it happening. So if I stand with my toes out and I hold that position, I've repeated it. Now what I've done is extended the length time on glute med and extended the contraction time on piriformis and deep six. So now I've held this lever not in neutral for an extended period of time, which means when I now go to use the lever, those muscles on either side of the lever aren't neutral and available to do equal amounts of length and strength. They've been patterned outside of their functional design. Go ahead, Gary. That brought up something for you?
Yeah, I think you mentioned some science behind that. If you hold that position for a certain length of time, it actually changes the repatterning. Could you kind of refresh me on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you brought it up. There's 2 time science data points that you've heard me say, and I'll
Yeah.
outline them here for us as well. The first one is about fascia.
Hmm.
And this information came to us through me via the first International Fascia Conference. This was one of my main takeaways. And again, we get to always keep learning and growing and finding out other information from other scholarly sources. And at the Fascia Conference, they taught us through their research that if you hold a muscle in a position, AKA a joint action, for 49 minutes, the fascia that wraps around that muscle, and every muscle has fascia wrapped around it, will bind enough that it requires 20 to 30 minutes of opposing that joint action, that muscle's held position, to undo the bind of the fascia. And as soon as you hold that muscle in that same position for 1 more minute longer, 50 minutes, 50, that bind in the fascia at 50 minutes requires 3 to 4 hours of opposing action to undo the bind in that fascia. So for the you
Whoa.
fascia lovers out there, hey, yay, you're going to love that. And notice that even in the science equation, movement is mandatory. So manual practitioners love to talk fascia, love to boast about how they work fascia, and I love you guys for it. And even in the science, it tells us it must be moved to be unbound. There has to be movement in there. So again, that's where we overlap in our manual and movement practitioners. We're here in the middle, meeting in the middle. We both need to do the work and know the same anatomy. The other time science that I've shared with you along the way is the 90-second mark. And That's my research clinically over years and years and years and thousands of bodies. When you hold a position, hold a muscle in a position or in an action, sorry, I don't want to say position because that confuses us with the fascia. But when we hold a muscle in an action of contraction or a muscle in length, which would be the opposite side of the lever, when we hold it for 90 seconds, it lays down a pathway that we can then see the changes in that muscle. It usually happens right at the 45-second mark. Either you give up or they give up, or there's a lot of feedback from the body and it gets a little bit kerfluffly. But if you just work your way right through that 45-second window and hold for 90 seconds, the ease will come, the change will have occurred, and both you and your client will experience that change. It's always 90 seconds. So that 90-second held action is a shots method number. And we use both of these numbers readily all the time. So if we use both of those numbers, the fascia number of 49 minutes and the shots method number of 90 seconds, and we go back to this held pattern, not a design pattern, but a held pattern of standing with my toes out, even walking with my toes out. How long have I held then piriformis and the deep six in a shortened position, and glute med and min and the other muscles that go with it? If some of you are like, it's not just glute med and min, right? Because you know reciprocal inhibition, but all the muscles that help with lateral rotation by lengthening, so AKA the medial rotators. How long are we holding those in a lengthened position? Because as soon as you think about the elasticity in muscles, we're off fascia now, we're on muscles. As soon as you think about the elasticity of muscles, think about the elasticity of muscles like rubber bands. If I hold a rubber band in a lengthened position for an extended period of time, extended, eventually that rubber band is going to lose elasticity and it won't snap back. In fact, you guys can tell I just changed this rubber band on Murph because I hold this rubber band like this for teaching purposes and it loses elasticity. It's very similar to muscle fibers. And if this is all news for you, if you're like, I didn't even know that, again, we get to learn. So come back and we have it in our coursework. Please learn this about muscles so that it can start really landing for you. Wow, this is occurring in my client's body when they're not here with me. That's how we intercept lifestyle patterns that really make a difference to the chief complaint that your client is coming with. Chief complaint doesn't have to be pain. Chief complaint can be, I can't get gains in my workout, or I can't move and do what I used to do, or I can't move without pain, or I just can't move anymore. Those are all chief complaints. Those are all symptoms. And those symptoms speak to an imbalance in the body's functional design. So we need to know what those parts are, how they work, what could go wrong, and then address it. Go ahead, Gary.
I'm just I'm just thinking about the 50-minute thing that you mentioned,
Yeah.
and the 3 or 4 hours that's required to undo that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that 3 or 4 hours in one swoop? Like I
Mm.
got to hold that for 3 or 4 hour position, or can we do it in segments? I mean, yikes.
Right.
What I'm thinking about is people who sit at a computer. They
100%.
don't get up and move, and there it is, stuck. In
Mm-hmm.
50 minutes, they're stuck now.
Exactly.
Anyway,
So that's brilliant that you just took the anatomy information and then applied it right away. Right? That's what we do with the information. We don't just take a bunch of notes on it, but like, oh, what's the implication of that? How does that apply in real life? Where's my part in that as a
mm,
practitioner? I love this for you, Gary. Mwah. So here's what I do with it. What I do is I know the information and I share it readily. That's why you've heard me say it even to you guys a million times. I say it more to my clients. I let them know about that 49-minute mark and I set them up for success. I have a client downloadable PDF that they all can have access to. And I also tell them in every session. And here's what I tell them. I tell them to stop at 45 minutes. Because just like you said, Gary, most of the time that lifestyle choice is happening at a computer. And if I'm in the middle of, I just got to finish this one document, I just got to hit send on this email, and that minute mark clicks over, science does not wait for me to hit send. Right. So I'm going to let my clients know, set yourselves up for success and do it at the 45-minute mark, and then stand up, even stand up and hit send. Right. So I set them up for success. Then I know as the clinician, they probably didn't do that at every 45-minute mark. I mean, even I don't do that. Hello, I've been sitting here for, it's 52 minutes now, right? Even I have that same scenario in my own body right now, and I just taught it to you. So what do I need to know? As a clinician, I need to know I've got to be able to do some direct work to the fascia. I've got to absolutely know equal function of that lever, and I've got to restore it at the same time that I'm addressing the fascia. And I've got to be able to check for all the muscles that are reciprocal inhibition concert goers to make sure that they have not taken over a job and I mistakenly thought that the agonist was doing it. I need to do all of that in my session with someone. I need to set them up for lifestyle success. I need to address the fascia, and I need to address the muscles under that fascia and the job that they do. What do they do? What joint action do they do? And are they doing it? Which is right back here where we are with our 8 principles, right? So that's how I use all the information and I put it together to make an effective treatment plan.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Okay, so we could go through all of our joint actions in this way. Maybe what we'll do another time is we'll work through some other joint actions if that would help you. And also, Gary, I know you're in our club too. So post in the club, we could work through all of the joint actions and who's supposed to be doing the job and who's supposed to be lengthening to let the job happen. I'll let you guys know that if you are working with anyone with upper body stuff, so we didn't get to shoulders today, which is totally fine. We worked through joint actions of shoulders last week. There's a lot of compensatory action that happens upstairs here, especially when we're weight bearing. Not only because it's the arms, but we're not weight bearing on them as a habit. We don't walk on our arms. And I just went with my nephew and his wife to the Natural History Museum over the weekend, and we looked at the timeline of how far back we were two-legged walkers, and it is a real thing. I know there's some people are like, well, we're designed to walk on our arms and we should walk on our arms. No, we're designed to walk on our legs. However, we should be able to weight bear on our upper body, right? That's weight bearing is what makes muscles stronger. So for those of you who are movement providers, yoga, Pilates, personal trainers, anytime someone's bearing weight on their upper body, on their upper extremities, Murph's arm is way over there. Oh no, here it is. Anytime we're bearing weight on our upper extremities, even our own weight is bearing weight because we're not designed that way. It's also, you could tell the bones are smaller, so they don't have as much density to them. So even like a downward dog or a push-up is still bearing weight. It's still considered bearing weight. Definitely if you're adding external weight, like resistance on a reformer or weight on a machine or free weights in a gym setting, definitely the alignment matters and the muscles that do the job. So we haven't talked alignment today. We're on muscles that do the job. If, for example, I wanted to go do shoulder flexion, let me just show him again. So shoulder flexion, either taking my arms overhead and bearing weight like downward dog, or just taking my arms at parallel to the ground, chest level, and then doing elbow flexion, or even shoulder extension and doing presses like this. Anytime I'm doing shoulder flexion, if the muscles that are designed to do that function, and just in the interest of time, I'll just list them out here, anterior deltoid and the clavicular head of pec major, when those two muscles aren't strong enough to do the job, and they largely wouldn't be because we're not designed to be walking on our arms, and if I start adding external weight right away, external weight, if those two muscles aren't strong enough to do the job, again, my body's still going to do what I ask it to do. How, though, is usually where the pain comes in. It's going to recruit from another muscle. It's going to recruit from another muscle that usually does upward rotation of the scapula because it's going to make it look like it's creating flexion of the shoulder. I'm going to do upward rotation of the scapula that's going to make it look like I'm doing flexion of the shoulder, which I'm not. And now I've got all kinds of neck and shoulder issues going on. And both manual and movement practitioners tend to squirrel out fast when it comes to upper body. And I will do another Tuesday training on this. I want you guys to be able to know the joint action, the muscles that do that joint action, and how else could that joint action look like it's happening when it's not really a clean joint action. We talked about clean joint actions last week. So you want to see them clearly, cleanly in your mind's eye to be able to discern, is that really happening? The way you could tell often is someone goes to do a shoulder press and they shrug their shoulders, or they're in downward dog and they're shrugging their shoulders, or they go to pull on the pulleys, the straps of a reformer, and they shrug their shoulders to get the straps back behind them. That's clearly a recruitment pattern because of muscles not strong enough to do the job. As practitioners, if we continue to let that happen, we are complicit to the problem that that client either has today or will have later. We don't want to be complicit. We're literally here to get them out of pain. So we want to know that type of habit and patterning that happens and where to intercept ourselves. Okay. So if you've made it here to the end of our hour together, then you have spelled out the pin it to win it. And it is a prelude to what's coming next month in our club. We are workshopping through together in the entire Sacred Sacrum course, which we just had back in the fall. We redid our course, if you will. We all met live and we workshopped it out, and we have worksheets and all the goodness that comes with it. We had amazing study groups that happened. And so those of us who are joining us in the club for the month of February, for the love of the sacrum, man, it's my favorite bone. I love it the most. And so we're working through Sacred Sacrum together in the club. Again, for those of you who have not yet joined us in the club, we have a course of the month. This month is the 8 principles that we talked through today in the last few weeks of Tuesday training. We have the entire course, all the workshopping, the quizzes, and the CEs that go for it. Good job, Gary. That go with it, I should say. We have study groups each Tuesday with our advanced level advocates that will help you workshop through and answer questions and anything that you have going on there. I'm also in there every single day answering questions and coaching and hot seating you to get you the answers so that you can apply what you know. So we're doing applied functional anatomy, the 8 principles here in January. In February, we start Sacred Sacrum. So now this week, the last week of the month, is the best time for you to join us because you'll have access to both courses within a week's period of time. And as my guest, you can come join us in the club for a week with no obligation, no payment, and just see if you like it, see if you're getting value for the time that you spend with us. You can come for a week as my guest. I heartfelt, openly welcome you to do that. You won't know if you don't come and try it. And I promise you, once you get in there, you'll see a whole bunch of value. We also have implementation challenges every single month where we workshop out exactly what we did today. Our practitioners post videos and images of client questions, and they're like, that's what I did. I went and worked on my client, and now what do you guys see? And I'm also in there answering questions as well. So you can have support on exactly what you're working on clinically as well. All of that's happening in the club, guys. So come join us. We have the link pinned here to the bottom of the video. If you're watching on YouTube, we also have it in our description section. Come join for a week as my guest, come join for a month, come join for the year, and you'll save a whole bunch. And I will look forward to seeing you guys there and also back here next week for more Tuesday training. Thank you so much for joining me today. I had a blast with you guys. I hope you got some good value. Did you get something good today, Gary?
A lot. Thank you.
A lot. Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I love. Music to my ears. Okay, fantastic.
So where, quick question, where would I get that answer to the other synergistics on the flexion, hip flexion?
Where would you get answers to?
Yeah, so it's psoas, but what are the other synergists to do that?
Okay, great. So the coursework that would get you there would be the 8 principles has it in
Okay.
Yep, in I think it's lesson 4. You can see it all outlined in what's covered. You might not have gotten through lesson 4 yet. Make sure you do that, Gary, because you have till the end of this month to get that course absorbed. I also talk about reciprocal inhibition in many courses because, as you can tell, it's so important. So we talk about it in Inspired Beyond Anatomy. We talk about it again in Inspired Beyond Anatomy Level 2, because again, it just keeps coming up. We also dive through it in Muscles and Movement, which is one of our most concentrated courses in the whole academy. We literally walk through every muscle and its movement job and how they work together in that course. So reciprocal inhibition comes up in at least 4 different courses in our academy. Right now, as a club member, you have access to that in Applied Functional Anatomy. I think it's lesson 4. Go back and check that. You'll see it. You can also ask the advocates if you're going to study group today, or you can also post it in the club if you want some support on that. However, I do recommend, especially if you're in the club and you're there to learn, don't ask somebody else for the answer. And I know you don't, Gary. I'm just speaking generally. Don't ask someone else to give you the answer. Ask someone else to point you to where you can go learn the answer. Because if you learn it, you're involved in the information, right? And we just talked about that. You were such a good example of that for us today, Gary, that we don't want to just have information. We want to have a application for the information. And in that course, 8 principles, we're applying it. Hello, applied principles, right? Okay, does that answer it for you, Gary?
Thank you.
Yeah, and then a little more. Okay, great. Awesome, guys. I had such a good time with you today. I'm so glad you got something out of it. If you're here watching us live or on the replay, let us know what your top takeaways were. And if you have any other questions for me, because again, I'm here to serve you and fill in those gaps for you so that you can move with confidence through your work as a clinician. I'll see you guys next week for more. Bye for now.